You wake up tired even after 8 hours of sleep and wonder why your life feels stuck in the same repeating pattern. Maybe you tell yourself you'll change tomorrow, start fresh, take control, but tomorrow never actually comes and nothing ever changes. Stay with me until the end because this story might show you exactly what you've been missing all along in your life. There was a man named David who worked the evening shift at a packaging plant on the edge of town every single day. He clocked in at 4 every afternoon and left just after midnight, walking home alone under streetlights that barely worked anymore in the darkness. His apartment was small and bare, just a single room with a bed, a table, and a window that looked out at absolutely nothing. He earned just enough to survive each month, but never enough to feel secure or plan for any kind of future beyond next week. David wasn't lazy or careless. He showed up on time every day and did his work without complaint or hesitation, always reliable and present. But inside, he felt invisible and forgotten, like the world was moving forward and he was standing completely still, going absolutely nowhere with his life. Every night after work, he would sit at his table eating cold food and think the same repeating thought that haunted him constantly. This can't be all there is to life. There has to be something more waiting somewhere beyond this endless cycle of work and sleep. One Thursday evening, his younger sister called him late at night, her voice shaking with worry and fear that he could hear through the phone. "David, Dad's in the hospital and it's serious. You need to come home right now," she said through tears that wouldn't stop flowing from her eyes. He took the first bus out that night, a long 2-hour ride through empty highways in the middle of darkness with only his thoughts. When he finally arrived, his father was awake, but pale and weak, lying in a hospital bed that looked too small for his shrinking body. The doctor said it was exhaustion, stress, and years of ignoring his health and pushing through pain that his body could no longer handle or endure. His father looked at him with tired, hollow eyes and said something David would never forget for the rest of his life. Words burned into memory. "Son, don't end up like me, working hard every day but never building anything that lasts beyond the paycheck, never creating something meaningful or worth remembering." David sat there in silence long after his father fell asleep, staring at the floor and feeling something break inside his chest that had been holding. He realized in that moment they were living the same life, just in different rooms and different decades, repeating the same mistakes across generations without learning. On the bus ride back home the next morning, David noticed an older man sitting quietly across from him, reading with unusual focus and peace. He was maybe 60 years old, dressed simply in plain clothes, reading a worn paperback with calm and steady focus that seemed almost meditative in nature. David recognized him vaguely as someone who ran a small printing business somewhere in town, though they had never spoken before in their lives. It was strange to see someone like that on a public bus at dawn instead of driving, which made David curious about his story. David hesitated for a moment, then gathered his courage and asked quietly, "Excuse me, why are you up this early when most people are still sleeping?" The man looked up from his book and smiled gently, his face kind and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. "Because I wake at 5 every single morning without exception, It's the only time the world lets you think clearly without any distractions or noise. David blinked in surprise and asked, "Don't you get tired doing that every day? Waking up that early when it's still dark outside and cold?" "I sleep at 9 every night," the man said calmly. 7 hours is enough if you use them, right? And don't waste time scrolling or watching television. He studied David for a moment with knowing eyes, then said, "You work nights, don't you? I can tell by the way you look exhausted." David nodded slowly, feeling seen for the first time in months, like someone finally understood the invisible weight he carried every single day without complaint. "So you sleep when the world is awake and wake when it's asleep," the man said softly without judgment, just stating the obvious truth. "No wonder you feel stuck in place. You're living completely backwards from everyone else, out of sync with the rhythm of normal, productive life." The man introduced himself as Mr. Brennan and leaned forward slightly with quiet intensity, as if about to share something important and deeply personal. He said, "Let me tell you something important I learned 30 years ago that changed everything for me and set me on a completely different path. The hours between 5 and 7 in the morning, those are the only hours you truly own without interruption from anyone or anything in this world. No phone calls, no demands, no distractions, just you and the life you want to build in silence, peace, and complete focus on your future." David felt something stir inside him, a fragile hope he didn't trust yet, but couldn't ignore, like a small flame beginning to flicker in darkness. "But I work until midnight every night. I need to sleep or I'll collapse," David said, trying to find reasons why it wouldn't work for him. "Then sleep when you get home and wake at 10, Mr. Brennan said calmly, as if it were obvious, adjusting your schedule to make it work. "That gives you 5 hours of rest, enough to survive, then live your real day when the world is awake and opportunities are actually available. And if you ever switch to day work eventually, keep waking at 5 every morning, always making it a permanent part of who you are." He wrote his number on a scrap of paper and handed it across the seat to David, offering help that few strangers would ever give. "If you're serious about changing your life, call me and I'll show you what to do with those hours, how to use them for transformation. But only if you mean it, because most people talk about change and never actually act. They just keep complaining and hoping things improve magically." David got off the bus holding that paper like it was a key to something he couldn't see yet, a future he couldn't quite imagine. That night, he lay awake, thinking about his father, the hospital, and Mr. Brennan's quiet certainty and calm strength that seemed almost impossible to possess. At 3 in the morning, he made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary, knowing it would change everything if he followed through. "I'll try it, just once, just to see if it's possible," David whispered to himself in the darkness of his small, empty apartment. The next day, at 10 in the morning, he forced himself awake after only 4 hours of sleep, his body protesting every movement he made. He called Mr. Brennan's number, his hands shaking slightly as he dialed, nervous about committing to something he didn't fully understand yet or trust. They met at a small diner near the plant later that day, sitting across from each other in a worn booth by the window. Mr. Brennan looked at him with approval and something close to respect, as if David had already passed an important test just by showing up. "You actually did it and called. Most people don't even make the first call, they just keep the number and never follow through with action. He pulled out a worn notebook and began to explain the system with patient detail, speaking slowly so David could absorb every single important word. David, your life right now is like a house with no foundation. It can't grow because you never work on the base that everything depends upon. Between 5 and 7 every morning, that's when you build the foundation that everything else stands on. The invisible work that creates visible results later. 2 hours a day is 14 hours a week, 60 hours a month. Over 700 hours a year of focused work on yourself and skills. That's 3 full months of focused work that most people lose to sleep and distraction, wasted time that could have built something extraordinary and life-changing. Here's what you do with those hours, Mr. Brennan continued, his voice steady and clear, laying out a simple system anyone could follow consistently. First hour, learn something that will change your economic situation, a skill, a trade, something real and valuable that people will actually pay money for. Second hour, move your body and plan your day. 30 minutes exercise, 30 minutes thinking and preparing so you're ahead of everyone else always. Do this every single day for 90 days without missing once. No excuses, no exceptions. No matter how tired or unmotivated you might feel, after 90 days, come back to me and show me what you've built with those hours. Prove that you actually did the work consistently. If you've done the work honestly, I'll help you find better opportunities and open doors. I know people who need reliable, talented individuals like you. If you quit halfway through, don't bother calling. Success only comes to people who show up when it's hard, when nobody's watching or cheering them. David wrote it all down with shaking hands, feeling the weight of the commitment, understanding this was more serious than anything he'd attempted before in life. Mr. Brennan added 3 rules that were not negotiable under any circumstances. 3 principles that David must follow without exception or modification of any kind. 1. No negotiation. You wake at 5 no matter what, no matter how you feel, even on weekends or holidays or days when everything hurts. 2. Sleep by 9 every night. You can't cheat, rest, and win. Your body needs recovery and repair to function at the highest possible level. 3. The first 2 weeks will feel impossible, and your mind will create excuses. Push through anyway. Ignore the voice that tells you to quit. David looked up and said with more conviction than he felt, "I'll do it. I won't quit," making a promise he desperately hoped he could keep. "We'll see," Mr. Brennan said with a faint smile that suggested he'd heard those words before from others who failed to follow through with their commitment. The first week was brutal and tested every part of David's willpower, pushing him to limits he didn't know existed inside his tired body and mind. David's alarm rang at 5, and his entire body screamed for more sleep and begged him to stop, to give up this insane experiment immediately. But he remembered his father's face in that hospital bed and the regret in his voice, the warning not to waste his life the same way. He stood up, his legs heavy, and walked to his table in the dark, forcing movement when everything inside him wanted to collapse back into bed. He sat down and opened free tutorial videos on basic graphic design, something he had always been curious about but never had time to actually learn. His eyes burned from exhaustion. His mind wandered constantly, but he kept going and refused to quit, pushing through the resistance with pure, stubborn determination. At 6 in the morning, he walked around the block for 30 minutes, even though his legs felt heavy, dragging himself through the empty streets. Then he sat at his table and wrote down 3 things he wanted to improve that day, creating intention and direction for the hours ahead. By 7:30, he collapsed into bed and slept until noon, his body aching from the effort, exhausted, but knowing he had kept his word. It was exhausting and lonely, and no one understood why he was doing it or cared. They thought he was crazy for waking so early. But around day 18, something shifted inside him that he hadn't expected, a change so subtle he almost didn't notice it happening. At first, gradually. David woke up at 4:58, 2 minutes before his alarm, his body adapting to the new rhythm without conscious effort or struggle anymore. His body had adjusted to the rhythm, and the resistance was fading, replaced by something that almost felt like anticipation for the quiet morning hours. The design tutorial started making sense. He learned how to use basic software and completed his first small project, something he could actually show people. His morning walks became peaceful instead of painful, a time he actually looked forward to, enjoying the stillness before the world woke up around him. He started to notice the sunrise, the stillness, the feeling that he was ahead of the world for once, building while everyone else was sleeping. By the end of month 2, David had finished 4 online courses and built a small portfolio of practice work that demonstrated real skills and capability. He had lost weight, his mind felt clearer and sharper, and his co-workers noticed the change in him, asking questions about what was different lately. "Man, you look different lately. What's going on with you?" one of them asked during break, genuinely curious about the visible transformation they were witnessing. David just smiled quietly and said, "I'm building something new, something that matters," not wanting to explain the full story to people who wouldn't understand. In the 3rd month, David took a risk that could have embarrassed him, putting himself out there in a way he never had before in life. He redesigned the shift schedule board at the plant using his new skills and showed it to his supervisor, nervous about how it would be received. The supervisor stared at it in silence, then asked with genuine curiosity, "Where did you learn this? This looks professional, like something from a real designer." "I wake up at 5 every morning and teach myself," David said quietly, feeling exposed, vulnerable to judgment or ridicule from someone who held power over him. A week later, the plant manager called him into the office unexpectedly, and David walked there with his heart pounding, unsure what to expect at all. "David, we're opening a small design department for packaging labels, and we need someone who understands production, someone who knows how things actually work here. The job is yours if you want it, day shift, nearly double your current pay starting next Monday if you can make the transition that quickly." David stood there unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion, overwhelmed by how quickly everything was changing after just 3 months of consistent effort. 3 months ago, he was invisible, just another night worker nobody noticed, and now he had a door opening that he had built himself brick by brick. Now he had a door opening that he had built himself, through discipline and early mornings that nobody else knew about or would ever see clearly. He called Mr. Brennan that night, his voice shaking with gratitude and disbelief, barely able to form words through the emotion flooding through his entire body. "I did it. 90 days straight. Never missed a single morning, and they just offered me a promotion I never thought was possible for me." There was a pause on the line. Then Mr. Brennan's voice, warm and steady, filled with the satisfaction of seeing someone actually follow through completely and successfully. I knew you had it in you from the moment you called. Now don't stop. This is just the beginning of what you can build. This isn't a trick or a phase. It's who you are now. Someone who shows up when it's hard and does the work others refuse to do. I won't stop, David said, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones, knowing this routine had become part of his identity and character. 1 year later, David was leading the design team and earning 3 times his old salary, living a life he couldn't have imagined just months before. He had moved into a better apartment and brought his father to live nearby where he could rest properly, finally able to take care of family. Every morning at 5, David still woke, not out of discipline anymore, but because those 2 hours belonged to him, sacred time that nobody could take. That was when he read, learned, and planned the life he wanted instead of the one he had settled for, building intentionally instead of drifting aimlessly. People would ask him, "Why do you still wake so early? You've already made it. You don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore or work hard." He would say, "Success isn't a place you arrive at. It's a choice you make every morning, a daily practice that never ends or stops mattering." If you're watching this and feel stuck, know that your life can change starting tomorrow at 5 if you're willing to do what others won't. Not because you're special or lucky, but because you decided to use the time everyone else wastes, turning empty hours into building blocks for transformation. 90 days, 2 hours a morning. That's all it takes to become someone completely new, someone you didn't know you could be until you tried. Subscribe if this story reminded you that small choices build entire lives, and that transformation is always possible when discipline meets consistent daily action over time.